Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're following up on the piece that we did with Deirdre Hennessy 2 weeks ago in relation to clover. Obviously, as we said on the day, clover is going to be a very important part of future dairy farming systems in Ireland. But obviously, it has its challenges around weed control and so forth. So there aren't too many of us in the dairy side of the house that have the level of knowledge that Ciaran is going to deliver to you know in terms of sprays and the control of weeds within clover. And I suppose there's obviously been a lot of tension around the whole. On one side of the department are saying we have to put in clover, and on the other side the sprays were removed from it. Now, I suppose the department have probably got the blame there slightly in the wrong, and so Ciaran's going to give us a bit of a background to that scenario. And he's also going to talk about what's called IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, as well. So that's a very important part. I suppose people probably dismiss it a lot as being more a tillage element of farming, but it's an important part of grassland as well. And I'm involved with Ciaran actually in doing a course on a sustainable use directive, we'll say, which relates to pesticides during the course of most years. We haven't done it now with the last 12 months over COVID, but it's just making better decisions around soil fertility and making sure that grassland establishes well when you do reseed, so that when you do use your post-emergence, you're limiting the amount of spray and so forth. And like, spray is the last step in that journey, really, Ciaran, isn't it? And that's kind of the angle that you're coming from. So look, as I said, Ciaran is, just to give him his proper introduction, is a tillage specialist for the south of the country, covering most of Cork, Kerry, Limerick, kind of anywhere where there's tillage in the south of the country. Ciaran is covering it. Very knowledgeable in the area, and as I said, is going to talk to us today about the whole integrated pest management background as to why the clover safe sprays were taken away. There's a derogation which is going to kick in tomorrow week, I think it is, from the 14th, and it's only going to be there for 4 months. So Ciaran is going to give us some of the reasoning behind that and so forth as well. So I'll hand over to you, Ciaran. You're going to share, and I'll encourage people to ask questions as we go along, because Ciaran is very good in terms of the knowledge that he has here, and it'll be a great opportunity to pick up some pointers in relation to spray management and just the whole general management of weed control in grassland as well.
As Stuart said, Ciaran Collins, my own name. I'm a crop specialist based in the south. So look, my background is all crops really, but I do a little bit on obviously the herbicide bit there, as Stuart described. So 5 sections to my presentation: IPM, pesticides and water. You're all familiar with those. There's a lot of reminders in there, and I'll just emphasize the importance. The 2,4-DB is obviously the big one for today. I'll talk about the herbicides that are available for new lays, and then pests as well, because that often is an issue as well. So look, IPM, Integrated Pest Management, it's mandatory, okay? That's just something very important for us all, whether you're a farmer, an advisor, involved in the distribution of chemicals. It's mandatory for everybody. We all have a role to play in it. Sorry, I'm gonna have to try and do this if you can still see me. We all have a role to play, okay? And I suppose some people would say, well, look, cut to the chase. I need to know what chemical I need to spray in my reseeds or to control my docks or that. But we do have a smaller pool of products available, none more so than the 2,4-DB that we're going to talk about later on. Who knows what's going to happen with glyphosate or any of those products down the road. If there's any, I doubt there's any horticulture people on today, but if you go back 10, 15 years ago in horticulture, you had a broad suite of products available for controlling disease and pests in horticultural crops. Today, you have very, very little. They're minority crops. The cost of registration of a new product is so expensive that it's not financially viable at times for companies to do that. So, we just have to mind what we have, I suppose, and that's where the bit about the water comes in, but also be aware of IPM and only use the chemicals where we absolutely need to. So look, by way of definition, IPM is biological, physical, and other non-chemical controls, that you prefer all of those before you reach for the spray cabinet. So, and another thing just to keep in mind as well is the whole farm to fork area as well. It's about, everybody's familiar with it, and there's a number of areas in it, but one of the targets in there is to reduce the chemicals that we use, or the pesticides that we use at the moment, by 50%. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. People will be aware, obviously, in the fertilizer end of it as well, 20% reduction target there, and obviously that, completes that loop that Stuart was talking about, where, you know, clover incorporation and grassland is just so important. So IPM, look, I've said this already, it applies to all professional users. So professional users is all farmers, okay? And look, the basic principles of IPM, without, you know, spending too long on it: prevention and or suppression, you know, monitoring, application of appropriate plant protection measures. So like I've in the next slide, I've got a pyramid, but it's like that you do everything possible to prevent the pests. So the pests can be a dock in your grassland, it can be a leather jacket in your reseed, it could be a disease in your barley. So you do all the measures that you can, you know, the cultural control, the physical, all of those before you reach for the pesticide cabinet. But also within using pesticides, there's a lot of IPM measures we can use. So we only use, you know, because the max rate of something is 2 litres per hectare, that doesn't mean that we have to use 2 litres per hectare. You know, it's judging the rate to the size of the weed or the pest, the disease, assessing the risk. And it's also then about doing things properly, like, you know, that, you know, you abide by buffer zones, you know, weather conditions, you know, ground conditions, all of those things, they're all part of it. And the final bit is recording. And sometimes we maybe forget about that. We think it's across compliance. We write down what we did, and that is very important and is part of the Sustainable Use Directive. But it's also, if I apply a herbicide on my grassland reseeds, you know, it's coming back a few weeks later. What did it work? And, you know, if it didn't, why didn't it work? And doing all those assessments as well, okay? So that's the IPM triangle. And as I said, you do all the things, the cultural controls, the physical, biological, and finally the chemical is at the end. So I suppose the way that I kind of do it is it's a process of decisions and actions, okay? So you make a decision to do something, and then there's an action there after making that decision, and there's consequences to that action. So again, just to maybe, in a grassland context, I've sort of rejigged the pyramid here. So prevention, you know, examples there, you know, obviously limiting poaching, rotating silage and grass ground, as we know, constantly cutting silage, you get more of an open sward, more of an opportunity for weeds. We can all see it at the moment. I was driving around the countryside yesterday, and you'd be amazed by the amount of chickweed around. And I presume that's a consequence of maybe slightly slower growth this spring. You know, it is allowed, you know, where there was weeds there, allowed them to come through. Suppression, you know, it's a competitive sward. And in grassland context, that's 1, 2, and 3. It's having a competitive sward. And that's why when you spray a reseed, you spray your docks, you get your competitive sward. You won't see docks for 4 or 5 years if you've got a good competitive sward. So, and obviously linked to that is soil fertility. So they're all key aspects, I suppose, at the bottom of the pyramid. And then you have your decision-making process then. You know, I've got weeds in my field. Do I reseed? You know, or maybe can I do something like topping, or, you know, is physically, I suppose, can I pull weeds, like maybe ragwort at times, stuff like that, you know? So then that's the decision-making process. And then maybe you have to bring in thresholds as well. Like what's the population of weeds in this field, you know, per unit area, say per meter squared, like, and is that impacting significantly on grass production? Do I have to have a completely green field, absolutely weed free? What's the threshold? And can I manage a smaller amount of weeds? And then eventually you might say, okay, you know, I have to do something about this from a chemical perspective. And then it's about selecting the right product, the right rate. Then it's about applying it, as I said earlier on. And then the final bit is the evaluation, that we come back, look at it, what worked, what didn't work, what am I going to do differently the next time? Okay, so maybe that's just, Stuart, the IPM pyramid in a bit of a, maybe in a grassland context where, you know, where you can apply those different measures to the different layers.
I suppose, Ciaran, as well, just you said there about the kind of the thresholds that you're willing to tolerate, like, and obviously that's going to vary from weed to weed as well then. And you're kind of saying maybe, for example, you could have 3 or 4 different weeds in a sward, but they mightn't be all that serious. Now, docks obviously are a challenge, I suppose, and maybe if they're dominating and you do decide to spray for them, then there's obviously the benefit that you're going to impact on the other species as well, as long as you pick the right chemical. So there's almost a decision requirement there as well, that what you do decide to use, if you do use it, that it's actually effective across the spectrum of weeds that you do have identified in the fields as well, isn't it?
I think so, Stuart. And like a good example there is, and I often get called out to maybe a reseed where there would be annual weeds there. You know, something like brassica weeds would be a typical one now, or maybe red shank or something like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they're the only weeds there, you know, you could go in if you can graze it, or sometimes if they're bad, you might need to go in and top it or cut it, which might be ideal in some situations. But, you know, I suppose there are non-chemical ways of controlling some weeds. And I suppose it's knowing your weed, you know, is it an annual, is it a perennial, you know, and as you're right, like, and there's some weeds like docks, I suppose chickweed, they would be two examples of ones that you know, you probably will have to go to the spray cabinet at some stage there, all right.
Yeah, I suppose chickweed can be a bit funny in reseeds, like just depending on when you get a chance to get at it. I suppose with the post-emergence, it can actually dominate a sward very quickly, but
it can.
Like grazing can deal with it a lot of the time, but if it just gets out of hand, it actually can have a serious impact on the reseed, can't it?
On the establishment, absolutely,
yeah.
And that kind of goes for any of the annual weeds, like in the sense that, you know, no, I might be saying here, well, look, this isn't a problem because I can cut it or graze it, but like if the numbers are high enough, you know, it's going to suppress the sward and your reseed isn't going to establish properly. So again, I suppose back to the pyramid, you know, decisions and actions, you know.
Okay.
So my second part is 205 is pesticides and water. So again, I'm sure everybody has heard an awful lot about this. So I'll just go through some of the main issues there. So I pulled this up from a pesticide usage survey that was done. It was the last one that was done in 2017. So these are the top 10 active ingredients that are most extensively used on permanent pasture. So the reseeds wouldn't be in this, okay? So these are ranked by weight, so it's kilograms of active. So if we looked at maybe this in a different way, it's in the report, maybe per hectare, it would alter the table, but MCPA will always be at the top of it, whether it's kgs of active or whether it's area treated. It's the most widely used herbicide on grassland in Ireland. Okay, glyphosate is one that would fall down the table if you were looking at maybe on a per hectare basis, but like, you know, you're putting out maybe 4 to 5 litres up to 6 litres of 360 grams of active, so that brings it back up the table there. But I think it is important to know, look, which are the ones that are most widely used. So it's no surprise MCPA, glyphosate, 2,4-D is obviously a big one, and then you have a big tail off then, you know, into some of the others that would make up parts of products really.
Yeah, and I suppose you might just, we said they're very common to you, but like I've been saying to you before, I suppose the grassland side of the house, the chemical actually isn't the thing that comes to the mind first, I suppose. And I suppose ideally we probably shouldn't use trade names, but just to obviously, glyphosate is your Roundup, like
Glyphosate's Roundup,
your 2,4-D and your 2,4-DB would say, just maybe give a couple of trade names that people might recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. So D50, I suppose, would be 2,4-D, would be one of the common ones. Just trying to think of another one off the top of my head now, it's not coming to me, but MCPA would be M50. There would be, I suppose, most people would be familiar with MCPA in some shape or form. Tripachlor wouldn't be used on its own. It's generally in a mix with fluoxypyr. So fluoxypyr would be something, the straight would be hurler, but it would be in a lot of the reseed ones there. So
Pastor Trio,
Pastor Trio, Dockstar, those ones, you know. The 2,4-DB is the one that we'll be talking about in a minute. So that's like Clover Max, Legumix DB. It would have been sold as straight as Embutone. So that would be, then the Maker Prop P is gone now. That would have been CMPP of old, Duplicin, say. So that's gone since 17, or well, gone in Grassland. Clopyralid would be, again, it would be Dow Shield on its own, but it would be in Pastor Trio, those type products. Aminopyralid would be one that's in Forefront. Okay, just to give people an idea. But I'll talk. I have a slide at the end with the products in it, and I might maybe just go through it a little bit more then as well, Stuart.
Okay.
So I suppose, look, and I don't want to be, you know, kind of dramatic as such, but like, you know, I spoke about the heart lads earlier on, and certainly in my industry in tillage, we've had a couple of big actives gone in recent years that we would have been widely used, like the likes of chlortalonil and Bravo and stuff like that. So I suppose, look, we just have to be mindful that we have to mind the chemistry that we have. You know, if MCPA keeps turning up in water, look, it'll have to be restricted, or, you know, or maybe worse. So I mean, we just really need to mind the pesticides that we have, you know, and nobody wants to have a situation like that picture. So look, the ones that are most commonly found in water, there's 4 of them. This was from the EPA survey, Joint Position Paper on Pesticides in 2019. So MCPA is obviously the big one, 75% of all exceedances. And look, there's reasons for that. As you saw on the previous slide, it's widely used, number one, but it's highly soluble. Okay, so you're getting surface water contamination. You know, literally straight runoff, or also from spray drift as well. But you also, because it's so soluble, you get groundwater leaching as well. And I suppose where you think of MCPA, I suppose its primary use is in for the control of rushes and that. So, you know, that's obviously going to be the wetter ground. So like, if we think of back to our IPM and link this up with pesticides in water, you know, there's a massive cultural control area around rushes. You know, it's drainage, it's soil fertility, it's reseeding, the competitive sward, all of those things, rather than running out with MCPA once a year, you know, because that's inevitably, and it's obviously there in front of us, it's appearing in the water the whole time. So, you know, there's a massive IPM piece that needs to be done around MCPA. The Mecaprop, as I say, is gone at this stage. The 2,4-D would also obviously be quite widely used there as well. And clopyralid shows up as well. Now, clopyralid would be in pasture trio. Now, that would also be used in tillage crops as well. It's due to, it's again a little bit like MCPA in terms of its solubility and that, and there are restrictions in terms of dates when you can use that at the end of the year as well. So look, just to kind of wrap up the pesticides in water bit, it's just to be aware of buffer zones. Okay, that is the crucial thing. You know, I spoke about the soil conditions. You know, you obviously don't spray when there's surface water. You need good ground conditions. Obviously, you don't spray in adverse weather conditions. But a crucial one is buffer zones, and we need to be mindful there. So I took that photo when there was a bit of sun shining, so I'm not sure how visual it is, but the outside stake there is 5 meters from the top of the bank. So that stake there I would regard as the top of the bank. So every product has a buffer zone. It can be 1 meter out to, we've got a new fungicide this year that's got a 30-meter buffer zone. Okay, so the stake is the top of the bank. Anywhere where there's water, any water carrying body, you measure from the top of the bank and you move out, whether it's 1, 2, 5, 30 meters, and that is your buffer zone. You do not go inside that with a standard flat fan nozzle. Okay. So,
Ciaran, you're saying there that we'll say the stake is back to 1.5 meters from the top of the bank, and your buffer is from the stake. Then, so in reality, yeah, you're even further back than your buffer is really almost.
Well, yeah, the measurement for this is the top of the bank, and I suppose that is important, and it can be hard to define now. You know, yeah. I suppose, you know, sometimes with a river it might be easier. Like I use the stake there. I suppose if that drain was to overflow there, I'd imagine somewhere around the stake is kind of where that would start to happen. Like, you know.
And I suppose it's like, I know we've done, as I said to Deirdre yesterday, we've done a bit of work on this in relation to the slurry in particular there, and how the 5-meter buffer actually doesn't come into play until 2 weeks after the close period, and 2 weeks before the close period. We'll say that it's actually a 10-meter buffer for slurry for those 2 weeks either side of the close period as well. I think that's actually, we haven't done that now. That's a very visual element, and it comes across quite well. And the 2 meters is even for the fertilizer as well. I think I think we've been paying lip service to the whole buffer zone probably with a good while, but people need to be very conscious of it into the future across fertilizer sprays and slurry obviously as well. Yeah. And then we'll say fertilizer standard 2 meters, the slurry is a standard 5 meters. We'll say outside of that 2-week window around the close period. But the sprays, depending on the spray, it's going to vary. Like, and
it will vary.
Then you're trying your nozzle scenario then as well, and there could be more variation in it. So people need to be very conscious of it when it comes to the sprays in particular.
Yeah. And like if you're not sure, and I have a snip from the website there. I'll just go to that first, and I'll go back to the nozzles then. So every if you go into the department website under SUD, there's a what's called Stripe. It's a surface water tool for reducing the impact of pesticides on the environment, and all the commonly used herbicides will be on that list now. It was last updated in March 2020, so maybe if there's something after that, that might be missing. But look, there's just 3 examples there of widely used, grassland herbicides. So you've M50, which is the MCPA. It's got a 5-meter buffer zone. Clover Max, which we'll be talking about in a minute, has got a 1-meter buffer zone, and then that 2,4-D tripichlor combination there has got a 10-meter buffer zone. Now, I suppose I don't want to make it overly complicated. They are the buffer zones using what's known as a standard flat fan nozzle. If my thing will go back here for me. So that's a standard flat fan nozzle, which will be on, I will say every sprayer, but certainly the vast majority of sprayers. So a standard flat fan nozzle gives you, I suppose, small droplets, and they would be the standard, but you can use what's called an air induction nozzle. So what an air induction nozzle is that there is air incorporated into the nozzle as the spray is coming out, with the effect of creating larger droplets. Now they're coarser and larger, and I won't get into the whole area around spray technology in terms of coverage and that, but they do have less drift, and that is the key thing. So what the implication of that is if I have drift reducing nozzles, I can reduce that buffer zone down to, we'll say it's 10 meters there on the label. I can reduce it down to 1 meter there if I've got a 75% drift reducing nozzle there. Okay.
And I suppose, Ciaran, is it something that we'll say dairy farmers maybe that are doing their own spraying need to consider, or given that we'll say Clover Max there is already at 1 meter without the stripe anyway, so do you need to get overly concerned? Or and I suppose the second question then, is it just a matter of unscrewing the flat fan and replacing it with the air induction, or is there more to do to the sprayer?
Okay, most nozzle holders will hold up to 4 nozzles, so it's just twist it and you get the new set of nozzles, or the different type. I suppose from a tillage context, I suppose it really is about there's a couple of kind of scenarios really where you're spraying a lot and you have a lot of water courses maybe, and you are using a lot of products with wide buffer zones. I think they're a necessity, if you can, if you're just using Clover Max every year for argument's sake, or Glyphosate, which has got a Roundup, which has got a 1 meter buffer zone, you probably don't have that same requirement. But to be at the same time, using low drift nozzles, they are very effective, and they do reduce drift as well, so it does open up the opportunities for maybe, spraying days as well. So I think it's horses for courses. If somebody has a lot of water courses on their land, they're using products that, have a decent buffer zone, say from 5 meters out, there's certainly something to consider. I suppose that's the way I'd answer it, Stuart, really.
Yeah, and then I suppose the other thing, Ciaran, I suppose just to allay any concerns, I suppose the 1 meter buffer zone is there to avoid the drift. So like, just because you keep out a meter doesn't mean that you're not going to get effective weed control in that 1 meter strip to the wire either, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, you nozzle, obviously you get coverage from the nozzle. It's angled, but yeah, look, you will have an unsprayed strip, from that 1 meter or 5 meters or 10 meters in. That's the way it will work, like,
Yeah.
But look, it's to protect water, and that's the ultimate goal here, like, to protect water. If the product, say the M50 there, it's 5 meters, so there is a reason for that 5 meters, we'll say, and then the low drift nozzles obviously reduce the drift, so that does reduce that buffer zone then if you are using them,
Yeah, very good.
So section number 3 is short, but probably, Stuart, is probably the most important one just at the moment. And there's 2 parts to this 2,4 dB scenario, right? Firstly, as we said at the start, it's a component of Clover Max, Legamix DB, Clovex, DB Plus, all of those. It's Embutone would have been an example of a product, you know, where it was used on its own, and you might add MCPA or other products to it. It is the only clover safe new lay herbicide that's currently authorized. So it's obviously hugely important active for us. Typically, it's in Clover Max or Legamix DB or any of those. 240 grams per litre of the 2,4-DB and 40 grams per litre of MCPA. Full application rate there is 7 litres per hectare. Now, there's kind of two scenarios here. Any product containing 2,4-D that's on farm today, it must be used by October. So when the product goes off registration, distributors have 12 months to, or sorry, have 6 months to sell it out. You get it onto your farm before the 31st of October last year, you've 12 months to use it up. So there's a good bit of that, guys, that foresaw that this was going off registration. They bought it last year, they have it on their farm, they have until the 31st of October to use that. And that could be any one of those 2,4-DB products, whether it's, you know, Embutone or Legamix DB. So that's one scenario. The second scenario then is the emergency use. So like I was saying at the start, you know, products go off, are not available anymore for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it can be, you know, environmental or toxicity reasons. This product was taken off the market because the company, they made a commercial decision and they decided not to seek product authorizations in EU member states, okay? It's a commercial decision for whatever reason. It is actually approved by the department and there are no issues there in terms of product safety or anything like that. So it's a commercial decision. It's important to say that. Now, as you said at the very start, Stuart, clover is hugely important, and I had a slide on farm to fork there in terms of, you know, the fertilizer reduction there, 20%. Clover is obviously got a massive role to play in that, okay? So the department, and thanks to a few people in Teagasc, like Sir Michael O'Donovan, looked for the emergency use and it was granted because there were no alternatives were available. But there are a few conditions, and I suppose we need to, you know, we have this emergency use and it is brilliant. So it's very important that we, you know, we are aware of the conditions and we all abide by them. So we have 120 days to use it, to purchase it and use it, and that starts from the 14th of May. So if my calculations are right, that runs out on September 10th, okay? So any farmer can, after the 14th of May, can purchase it and then, but must use it up by September 10th. You can only buy and use in that period, and any unused stock should be returned, okay? So nobody should be left with some in stock after that date. And full traceability is required, and that's all the ways from the distributor to the farmer. We know that we have to keep records for under SUD anyway, but, you know, full traceability is required, and I don't know if I assume there'll be some inspections somewhere along the line of that to make sure. But, you know, look, we're very lucky to get this emergency use, and I think it's very important that we abide by the conditions of it.
So I suppose, Ciaran, what you're saying there is that if somebody were to have a cross-compliance inspection in October, they shouldn't have any Clover Max in their chemical store, basically, because it should have been returned. We're not supposed to be carrying that product.
Absolutely. So I look, it's all about planning. You know, whatever you're planning to reseed, work out the area, purchase that amount, or maybe slightly less than that amount, so you don't end up, you don't want to end up with bits of cans left over and stuff like that. That's expensive to get rid of after. Okay, so look, it's a bit of planning, I suppose, Stuart, really. Yeah. And like I said, look, the traceability, just make sure you keep your records up to date on that as well. Like, it's very important.
Yeah. So I suppose it's interesting. It was actually interesting to find out that it wasn't, like, as I said at the outset there, people probably thought it was the department actually pulled the availability of the product, but it was, as you said, a commercial decision. It's kind of strange in a sense, is it, that given the whole farm to fork strategy, I suppose, and the whole reduction of pesticides, well, maybe it's the reduction in pesticides that's motivating the commercial decision, really, but the fact that it's going to be required in Ireland, I suppose, isn't driving enough of a demand for those companies, is it?
No, and I suppose, look, there, you know, if you're looking at maybe, you know, I think we had a new herbicide or fungicide launched there relatively recently. I think some, you know, around 300 million was cost of putting the product together. So, As I say, you have to have a massive market for a product, to justify all the R&D that goes into it. So, I suppose while there are some signals that there may be something coming, at the same time, you wouldn't want to be depending on it either,
Yeah, okay. You're probably going to cover this in a minute maybe, but from 2022 on, what's the plan or what's going to be the situation? So
yeah, it's an excellent question. If you look at something like, I don't know is the straight answer. If you look at something like Agilox there, that would have been used, that gets an emergency use. It has got an emergency use, I don't know how many years now in a row. So that's a possibility. It can be applied for. No guarantees that it will happen, So the emergency use is something that may or may not happen down the road. I can't answer it. There is a product in the pipeline, but again, you just have to be careful about products in the pipeline, whether they will actually come through. They might be clover safe, but they mightn't control any of the weeds that we deem the kind of the likes of docks and chickweed, obviously too, that we would need to control. So there are some possibilities down the road. The emergency use or maybe new products coming online. I know that we are looking at some of the older products as well that might be registered, say for permanent grassland maybe. If maybe some of the other companies might make commercial decisions there to seek registration for reseeds, that's another possibility,
There's work going on behind the scenes in relation to that, though, I suppose, is what. And as you said, there was supposed to be a potential of a new spray coming on the market the coming year, but actually that's possibly going to be delayed a little bit more. Could be the following year as we kind of currently understand. But again, I suppose. You gave Michael the credit there, so Mike Egan and Deirdre would have been involved in it as well. But I would imagine that if we don't have good alternatives available by next year, that the lads are going to apply for that emergency use again for another period in the coming year, I'd say. And given that the department don't have an issue with the product, you'd imagine that it should be straightforward enough to get it. But it's not going to be something that they're going to get a 5-year derogation on. It's going to have to be a year-by-year kind of scenario, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that what you're saying makes sense, Stuart. Yeah, it's logical in fairness, but you just never can be sure. There's both political and commercial, so there's a lot of decisions there in the background,
Okay. There's just another question then, Ciaran. This might make more sense to you than it does to me now, but would you recommend stale reseed method as an alternative? That makes sense.
Stale seed bed. From a clover aspect, or is it just maybe establishment in general?
Let's say in general, yeah.
In general, I suppose, yeah. Ploughing is probably the most reliable, in my opinion. I think ploughing is the most reliable, but I appreciate there is number of reasons why you would use maybe direct seeding, which would involve a stale seed bed. You spray stale seed bed, for anybody who's not familiar, you spray it off with Roundup. You wait for everything to die off, and you can direct drill with maybe a one pass, or you can with direct drills, or you have a lot of options there. There are some advantages, and certainly, and I'll talk about in a second, in terms of pest control. But I think it's a little bit horses for courses, really. There's some land that's maybe quite stony or that as well, and it's not suitable for ploughing, and that's a good option in those scenarios too. But in my own opinion, ploughing is probably the most reliable, the most expensive, but the most reliable.
Yeah, in terms of seed establishment, it's definitely the most effective, I suppose. Yeah, but then I suppose there's also the questions been raised about the flush of nitrogen that gets released when you plough, and like you're winning on one side and losing on another side. It's kind
I think in terms of establishment method, in my experience, you really select a method that's suitable for the farm. I think that would be my answer to that question. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer either.
Yeah, true. Yeah, fair point.
Okay, so I have two little bits left, Stuart. We're okay on time, I think.
Yeah, we're fine, yeah.
So I'm going to go through herbicides for new lays. So there actually isn't a lot of change on last year now, as it turns out. And I'll have a final bit just on pests, because that always comes up as well. So look, I've a bit of a rhetorical question there. Which dock is easier to control there? There's no marks for getting the right answer here. You know, if you can spray something that's small and actively growing, you know, obviously it's much easier to control than you know, a dock with with big massive roots that are going down 1 meter. You have to get the chemical translocated from the leaves down through that root. You need very good growing conditions to succeed in that. So I suppose that's why, you know, where you have bad dock problems in particular, you know, reseeding, where you can spray off that dock there with glyphosate and start afresh. I mean, that's key, really. So just in terms of, you know, just a few areas around post-emergence weed control, really. I just said it there, but look, you know, reseeding is the best solution. It's the only solution where you've got long-term weed control problems. You just have no option other than to get in. You know, as I said, seedling weeds are easier to mature or to control over mature plants. Glyphosate's essential. You know, absolutely essential in that scenario, and also very important to use the correct rate. You know, the max rate for destruction of grassland is 6 litres per hectare. Again, in my experience, I think you should be up near the higher rates there. Again, I know there maybe from a grassland context where areas that I wouldn't be very strong on, there might be reasons for reseeding in the autumn over the spring, but from a weed control perspective, spring trumps the autumn, in my opinion, because you get more opportunities. Especially in, you know, further south you go, reseeding can work in late there into the middle of September, and that's fine, but you run out of opportunities to control weeds then. You're getting into poor weather conditions, and a lot of the herbicides like the phenoxys, which is your 2,4-DBs, MCPAs, they do not work well in cool conditions, and that's a very important thing to remember. So, you know, the spring reseed opens the door to a lot more weed control opportunities. So, you know, no, there might be other reasons, Stuart, why people might say, no, autumn suits me better, maybe from grass growth perspective and all of that, and that's another issue. The timing then is obviously crucial as well. Look, 6 to 8 weeks after reseeding in a kind of a normal situation, but what you're really looking for is, you know, from the clover safe spray perspective, you need that first trifoliate leaf out in the clover. So you need to see a good scattered clover across the field. That'll normally coincide with the grass at 2, 3, maybe 4 leaves, that sort of stage. And like you often get a scenario where, you know, if it goes late, you know, you get competition from the grass, and some of the, maybe especially like the docks, can be a little bit hidden under the grass when the sward gets big and your control isn't as good. So, you know, that timing is very, very important. And again, that's part of IPM there as well. And look, this can often happen. Don't spray if the plant is under stress. Somebody might be reseeding there today, you know, and maybe get a bit of rain at the weekend and it's up and established, and then get a dry spell. You know, we've all seen this patchiness, you know, because crops or grass reseeds are suffering from stress, and like you will damage both the clover and the grass if you're spraying a crop that's under stress. So unfortunately, in those situations, you do not have a choice other than to hold off until a bit of growth comes. And
the
then
only thing there, though, Ciaran, is it's going to retard the actual establishment as well in one sense. So, you know, like if you end up at 9 weeks at that stage, but because there was a dry spell and it hasn't really taken off, it's probably still going to have good control. But I think one of the things that we picked up with Deirdre there the other day is that in general we're very late spraying. No matter when we do it, even like as you said, the autumn scenario, sometimes it doesn't get done at all, obviously, until the following spring. And in cases then where like we're probably that bit late at the farm level compared to like the example I would have given today we were talking to Deirdre is that what I would see out on farm probably is that people are probably going to get the spray at the stage the lads are grazing it inside Moore Park, like, you know. So from your time in Moore Park, you know that they'd be spraying it very rapidly after, as quickly as they can basically, and they graze it at very low covers, and that's also part of IPM as well. I suppose the fact that they're grazing it at that lower cover means that they're getting more rapid tillering in that reseed, which is then creating the competition that you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's about understanding how the plant grows, apical dominance. Obviously the grazing management after the reseeding is huge, and, obviously ideally you wouldn't be cutting it, say for silage would be probably a good example, where you don't give the grass doesn't get a chance to tiller and cover the ground. So you don't get good ground cover. You cut your silage, you have a big open sward, and it allows, look, if there is space, that allows the opportunity for weeds to come through. I think I have a slide in a minute. Tim O'Donovan did a lot of work there a few years ago on duck control in reseeds. And one of the big ones was there, where you did get your ducks controlled at the right timing. You got 4 or 5 years of pretty much duck, sward free from ducks. And the reason for that was that even after that, after the year 1 or year 2, when the seedling ducks actually established, when there was even a bit of a bit of room for them to come through, where you had a dense sward, the grass, the chlorophyll in the grass was actually absorbing the UV light, and that was that was stopping the duck from the little seedling duck from establishing. So that ground cover is just crucial. And I think it was nearly one of the first things I said on the IPM is, stop poaching, a competitive sward. That's IPM all wrapped up in one,
Yeah.
Okay. So look, I suppose just in terms of target weeds, annual weeds, I said this already, not normally a big target. We can manage those. The exception there is chickweed. Now chickweed's an annual weed, but it behaves like a perennial weed because it does have the way it grows, its growth habitat one, but also the amount of seeds that it produces. So that's why chickweed is a particular problem. Biennial weeds, rag would be the likes of obviously ragwort and spear thistle that people would be familiar with, and then perennial weeds. I suppose these are the difficult ones: docks, creeping thistle, and buttercups and rushes. They're the big ones there. And I think you might have said this already, Stuart. From that work that was done, 1% in reduction in dry matter yield for each 1% in ground cover by docks. So there is a threshold that you reach very quickly where you might have to decide, reseeding is the only option. And that's just that experiment I was talking about there. Just looking at the clock there, I won't go into massive detail on it, but look, I suppose it just emphasized the point of, the importance of the seedling sprays, So you can see the red line there, it's that reseed in autumn 2010. The chart here shows, the graph here shows up to autumn 14. But I know from talking to the lads in Kildalton, go back to that plot 2 years after that again, and those, where those seedling sprays were done, there was still excellent control of ducks, compared obviously to the untreated or where there was mature sprays went on. Mature sprays, you're getting control quite often of the top growth, and you're not getting control of the big taproot that we saw there in the first picture. So, you think you have a great job done, and ultimately what happens is that rootstock, reinvigorates and you get the problem back again.
And the problem there, Ciaran, obviously, is that you're going back in with chemistry again then in subsequent years, whereas the effectiveness of the seedling spray is actually, while people might be saying why you're kind of reaching for the chemical very early on in that scenario, maybe it might sound like it's counterintuitive to the whole IPM thing. It's actually reducing the amount of chemical that's been used in the life of the sward by doing it that way.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've got bad ducks, you're literally in there. You're literally in there every second year, I suppose. Really, versus getting maybe 5 or 6 years out of a reseed. So, it's in terms of chemical load, it's obviously it's the way to do it from an IPM.
And generally, I suppose with the seedling sprays as well, you're going with lower rates in a lot of cases too. You're only maybe going 1 litre per hectare or 3/4 of a litre per hectare, compared with your standard is generally 2 litres with the likes of your dock stairs and your pasture trio and mature grassland.
Yeah, you're just reducing the overall chemical load. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I put together a slide here which sort of sums up I haven't obviously dealt with the established grassland, and Stuart, maybe that's a webinar.
That's another day, yeah.
But we'll say in terms of for people that are reseeding at the moment, we do have, we'll start with clover safe. So we do have our Legumix DBs. And then, our Underclears, Clovex, all of those type 1s. And I went through all of that. Some people have those in stock, 31st of October. If you're buying Clover Max, you have until the 10th of September, 14th of May to the 10th of September. They will do a very good job on the likes of docks. The timing is crucial. Most annual weeds, it'll do a good job as well, to be fair. The one weakness there is chickweed. Chickweed will not be controlled very well by those, and chickweed and clover safe is a problem. Okay, we had Triad available, tribenuron there. It's the third option there. When you add that, as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure it's not available at present. So if there is some in stock, to use up is the 30th of June anyway. Now there is, I won't go into the full rigmarole of it, but that product will appear on the market fairly soon, I'm told. I think the name is Taxi. So that chickweed option might even be available for the autumn. But as we stand today, that Triad, look, if there is some in stock, well and good, but I think it might be difficult to get for most people, Stuart. So that's just something to keep an eye on, clover safe and versus chickweed control there. Okay.
So again, Ciaran, I suppose it's emphasising that the reseeds have to be sprayed early with the likes of the clover safe, get in and graze it in to try and take out the chickweed that way, probably.
Yeah, the cultural control obviously is very important there. Yeah. So that tribenuron may be available later on, but as I say, at the moment, I think you'll find it hard to get it. The one above it there. So
Triad itself won't be available anymore. You're saying it's going to come on the market under the name Taxi potentially?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the plan. Now, as I say, what'll happen down the road, we'll see.
Yeah.
And then the one I didn't mention there is the straight, the embutones there. That's the straight 2,4-DB. Unless you have that in stock, that's the only where you're going to get that at the minute. And then we have the other options, which are really good, but in terms of weed control, but you obviously have the clover issue. So the straight Floxipire, which is binder, hurler, reaper, all of those people are probably very familiar with them at this stage. 0.75, it does an excellent job on docks and chickweed and dandelions as well, So if you're not worried about clover, that's a low cost option of getting docks and chickweed, done at, and it is very, very, very good. And then you have the two products that come from Wheelahans there. You've got Envy, you've got Pastor Trio. Okay, so Envy is Floxipire and Furazolam. So you're again getting a good broad spectrum, again good on chickweed and docks there. But when you add Clopyralid to Pastor Trio there, you're adding in thistles there as well. So Pastor Trio would be a very good broad spectrum all around there. But as I say, we have the clover issue there. So you're into oversowing after that, I suppose, if you want to get clover back into the sward in that situation.
And then there's issues around that then, Ciaran, in terms of periods of time between spraying and actually incorporating the clover, which is kind of making it tricky.
You are. No, it varies. I did a quick search there this morning. Envy Pastor Trio is 3 months. The label of Hurler was the only straight Floxipire. That says 12 on the label, but the other two contain Floxipire as well. But 3 months would be what Envy and Pastor Trio would be there,
So I suppose what you're really pointing at there would be that if you're using the likes of the Envy or the Pastor Trio or their equivalents, you're really looking at controlling the weeds this year with a view to maybe oversowing clover in the coming year. So that's part of the whole plan that Deirdre was talking about, kind of the strategy of how you're going to go about incorporating the clover on farm over the next number of years. It's not all about 2021 like.
It is true, yeah, it's planning. And I suppose that remember I mentioned there that like chickweed could be an issue, and if you anticipate chickweed being an issue, that's the route that you might have to take,
Yeah. Okay, now this is a question here. There's a couple of questions there. So are you finished the slides there, Ciaran? Yeah.
I am on that one. No, I have a section on pest control if you want, or it's...
Yeah, actually, that's going to be addressing one of the questions. So just before you move on to that there, how would you rate Pasture Pack? That's... I can't think of it. Is it CropLink brought that out there last year, or there's one of the companies? It's after putting I can't think of the chemistry that's in it, but And maybe you're not familiar with it probably. Because
I am. I'll come back to you in 2 seconds. It's one of these, and you'll see a little bit of this more coming down the road. It's one of these twin packs. So
yeah.
I think one of them is definitely Fluoxipyre. Anyway, I might come back to it short just before.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But you will see some of those where people will combine two products in a box or a pack. So it's quite broad spectrum from my memory. It would be for established grassland rather than reseeds.
Okay.
So I just look at the clock. I'll make a quick job of this. Look, pests, there are 3 pests really that we need to worry about. Frit Fly, and I can be quick on this because this is more of an autumn reseed problem than a spring. So the Frit Fly produces 3 generations during the year. So it's the 3rd generation that generally cause a problem. My picture mightn't be brilliant, but what you tend to see, some people call it dead heart. So you walk into the field and you can see the most recently emerged leaf, and if you just pull it, it just falls out, or it's gone yellow against the background of the green leaves around it. So the Frit Fly lays its egg, and the larvae feeds in the center of the stem, and that causes the newest leaf there to die. So in effect it kills the plant. More of an issue in the autumn. Now it affects Italian more than perennial. As I say, the autumn more than the spring. It does affect, someone mentioned direct drill versus maybe ploughing. It would be more of an issue there because you have more trash there to deal with. So look, the control really is, if you've had a problem with Frit Fly before, go to the spring rather than the autumn. If you want to do it in the autumn, another option is leaving a wide gap between crops is normally a good idea. If you can spray off, leave it there for 3-4 week period, or even if somebody wants to stick in a brassica crop or something like that, that's an option. There is no chemical control there. Come back to the IPM bit there. Sorry, the spray cabinet at the very start that went a few years ago. Slugs, I apologize, that's barley instead of grass, but anyway, it's the first picture that came to me this morning. Slugs will graze above the ground. So when you're trying to differentiate between slugs and leather jacket, you'll see the leaf shredding, and that's classical sign of slug damage. You can see it on the leaf there, above the ground. So in terms of slugs and risks, they do like clover, more so than ryegrass. Reseeds are more vulnerable. Slot seeding or direct seeding sometimes can be an issue because slugs will follow the strips. Some people call them like motorways for slugs, because once they get into a track, they tend to do a bit of damage that way, and you often do see a good bit of slug damage there with slot seeding. But the big one really is land or crops on heavy ground. So slugs obviously like to be on heavy ground, cloddy, where there's plenty of spaces between the soil particles, poorly rolled, rough seed beds. That's where you'll see slugs. Wet, they're the big issues. Control, ploughing definitely reduces the population. Fine firm seed bed, well dried out and rolled. Look, they're the key ones. You can use slug traps to assess numbers, and also you've got the chemical control, which is slug pellets like metaldehyde or ferric phosphate there. So there is a chemical control option there.
The slug trap then is just your fertilizer bag, isn't it?
Yeah. Basically, it's use a fertilizer bag, and put some bait under it. So something like muesli, they like muesli actually, something like that. Layers mesh is something that they like as well for some reason, stuff like that. If you get more than 4 or 5 under that, that's a sign that you may have an issue. But you need to do them around the field, not just inside the gap or that. You need to get a good distribution across the field to see the extent. But if you're anticipating a problem, it's a very, very good reason. It's a big IPM measure. Rather than just going out with slug pellets, see have I got an issue, check, put down the traps, check 24, 48 hours, count the slugs, more than 5 on average, you possibly have an issue there. And then the last one is leather jacket damage. So the larvae, obviously, of the crane fly or the daddy longlegs, more commonly known. Again, the risks here are mainly in the spring, but history is a great guide here as to whether you'll have a leather jacket problem or not. History repeats itself big style here. If you've had a problem in the past in a particular field, there's a strong likelihood that you'll still have that problem. A risk indicator, I suppose, if you see a lot of crane flies in July and August, mild wet autumns then favour the survival of eggs, which we tend to get quite a bit of. And it's in the spring that you actually see the damage. So the larvae, just when before they pupate, say that would normally be in April, May, June, that period. That's tends when you see the most damage from leather jackets. The symptoms, slugs, just remember, are over the ground. What you'll find with leather jacket, you'll walk across the field and you'll see individual yellow leaves. And you just pull them with your finger and they'll come away. They'll be nipped just below the surface. That's the sign of leather jacket damage. Control, again, look, ploughing during the egg laying period disrupts the life cycle. That's the big one, really. Again, you can put maybe a brassica crop there in between. A break, again, the same between destruction and resowing. But the big one, and it's the same, and it's a good way to finish the presentation, high soil fertility. So, you do your reseed, encourage good early plant growth, your pH is right, your fertility is right. That's once the grass plant starts to tiller, the stems get a bit too thick, and the impact that they make at that stage short is very little.
Yeah, okay, so just getting it off to the best start possible is the most important piece of it, so really, in terms of...
And that's the big IPM control, really. It's just getting the reseed going, and it will grow away from them. There's only a short period where the crop is vulnerable, really.
Okay, so if you can get a really powerful establishment by having everything right in the first place, like it could get a little checked by leather jacket, frit fly, slugs, etc., but it has the power to overcome it at the same time if it's establishing well.
It does, and just to remember as well, if you anticipate a problem with leather jackets, an autumn reseed. If you anticipate a problem with frit fly, or spring reseed. Now that's not exactly binary like that, but it's probably you. If you think of the life cycle of both pests, that's where you're going to probably get most success.
Yeah, very good. I suppose just to come back to the pasture pack thing, I just had a quick look there. It's Teagasc and Trust, actually, is what's in that.
Okay.
So you're happy enough with the effectiveness of those things, we'll say. That combination product, I suppose it's just broad spectrum, I suppose, is the plan with the two different chemicals, really.
It is. It is quite broad spectrum, and we'll cover like all the key weeds in established grass,
Okay, so thanks very much, Ciaran. I suppose just to summarise it all, I suppose we're obviously in a situation where our chemistry is becoming limited anyway. We've already lost some of the chemistry that has been available to us. So we have an emergency use in relation to clover max that we can avail of up to the 10th of September. But I suppose the main thing, I suppose, we got Ciaran on to talk about the chemistry, but the real important piece for people is to be aware of the fact that there's so much going on behind the scenes, and that in reality to reach, like Ciaran always gets the phone calls from ourselves in the grassland side when we have the problem and we want him to solve it with a chemical, but we should be working to try to avoid that scenario by focusing on soil fertility. And people will probably be blue in the face from us talking about this, but it's just underpinning everything, like in terms of grassland performance, but also reseeding, establishment, etc. So get a really good, strong reseed established. It has greater power to kick off and avoid the whole pest issue that you covered there at the end, but also the power to kind of suppress weeds then, which reduces the requirement for the chemical usage in the lifetime of the sward. I suppose, as you said there, we might look at coming back to another day later in the year, maybe about just kind of the kind of control in general, maybe silage swards maybe later on in the year, because it's nearly getting too late now to spray weeds and silage currently for first cut, just the way the year has gone so far. And yeah, sure, look, I suppose it's that IPM thing isn't probably something that a lot of dairy farmers have been exposed to. It's a lot more common at your side of the house with the tillage guys. But it's something that we need to be aware of, and the buffer zones would be the other thing that I would really emphasize to people as well. So that 2 meter buffer for the fertilizer, minimum 5 meters for slurry, and depending on the chemistry that you're using, it's going to be anywhere from a meter up to 30 meters, as Ciaran pointed out. Now that's probably a tillage spray as opposed to a grassland spray in that scenario, but we just need to be very conscious of it. We're very much in the spotlight in terms of everything that we're doing now around water quality, as Ciaran has said, and that exceedance in relation to MCPA is going to come back to bite us if we're not careful. So we need to be conscious of those buffer zones. So Ciaran, thanks very much for joining us today. Very informative talk. I'm going to push this one out through Twitter tonight that people would have a look back at it. There's great information in it for dairy farmers and grassland farmers in general. So, and as I said, something probably that we're not going to maybe seek out if we're attending something that we're going to go looking for, but it's something that people need to be very aware of. So thanks very much for joining me this morning.